Good morning. I hope you hear me. Hi. Great, thank you so much. He's coming right away, in a minute. Great. Let me check. Something okay? It's okay, everybody? Yeah, focus. It's already started. You can move.
You can start?
I started.
Oh, okay.
Just
Okay. I'm going to put some things over here. Need. And make sure this doesn't ring for any reason. Take this also off. Okay. I know.
Let me turn on the light.
How are we doing?
I think it's okay.
Yeah? Okay, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for bearing with me. It's already, I guess, 9 minutes. I get later and later. I apologize about that. This way? 1 second. Okay. But maybe it's okay. You see more of the background, of all the chaotic background that this enterprise entails. Oh, okay. Yeah. So anyway, greetings everyone. Thank you for joining with me today. And once again, thank you all for the tremendously warm and very helpful and positive wishes that you gave me. I appreciate them no end. It's really very wonderful to have this kind of support from everyone. Thank you very, very, very much. Well, I woke up this morning with this feeling of being bludgeoned. Somehow I felt that I had to watch our presidential debate last night, and forgive me if I basically talk more about the United States, but this is really in my mind and probably in most people's minds in the world, because we have an election coming up very soon, which is of tremendous, tremendous importance. That's, but really I had the feeling of being sort of kicked in the stomach, bludgeoned, left lying on the floor. That was my feeling after the debate. I was really reeling from it. It's very important, I guess, to understand the power of the bully and how the confidence that the bully has, no matter whether the bully is telling the truth, telling a lie, no matter whether the bully is doing something honest or something dishonest, actually comes across as often convincing, of course powerful, and very often incredibly smart somehow. But we have to realize that this is just a feature. These are features of the bully syndrome, as I would put it, and have to be quite aware about that and not be drawn into or try to be not affected by the pressure of the bully. Okay, that said, the world has not come out of the COVID-19 pandemic yet. Between last week and this week, I actually counted, well, I don't want to be like someone else, but it's actually true. Around 3 million new cases worldwide of COVID-19. And the United States, of course, has, in many states, in the United States, I should say, spikes larger than we saw in the early days of the pandemic. We wait for that vaccine, and we hope that it will be safe, that there will be, and I'm sure that it will be. But with the duration of the pandemic, of course, comes frustration, and it's individual frustration, as we are all affected by it, even I'm sure in the countries that have basically gone back to normal. It's still not really normal, and there's still an underlying sense of, I should say, dread of return, and also of just basic frustration, which can lead to many bad things. There's also societal frustration, and that is most dangerous. And what has not been on the radar, it's really sort of under the radar, has been the war between Egypt and Ethiopia. And it's an actual war, although it's basically now taking place mostly in what we would call cyberspace. There are electronic attacks trying to target infrastructure, target the problem of this problem of the harnessing the water of the Nile. And I'm not going to get into details about that, but there's a huge dam that has been built, and there's a cyber attacks trying to somehow what you say, spoil the controls, I guess, of that dam, and other things as well. Of course, there's a real war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. It's actually not at all pretty, quite terrible. And there's great tension between Greece and Turkey. Now, what is rather new, perhaps, for us, I would say, is that there are huge demonstrations in Nigeria. Nigeria, of course, has it. Oh, I need coffee. Yeah, there it is. Thank you. Today is a hard day for me. Yeah, well, Nigeria has sidestepped the worst effects of COVID-19, but now there are big demonstrations against the notorious secret police, I should say, has the name Special Anti-Robbery Squad, or actually in a terribly appropriate way, SARS. That way, this is also very dangerous. There have been peaceful protests, as I read here, throughout the country. The hashtag #EndSARS, and also in other countries where there are immigrant populations of Nigerians. We hope that it will actually do something good for the country and will not end in horrible tragedy. I should say that there is a little bit of good news in the world, and I've been really reading newspapers from all over this week. Yes, I know I'm sort of staying down because I'm reading from here, and unfortunately, my notes that I have here are a total mess. So I'm trying to read here, and then trying to remember, is this what I'm supposed to say or not? It's I don't somehow have the strength this week. I didn't have to prepare in detail as I should have. But in any case, I have all the stuff here, and what we did find, and why doesn't this work here? Oh, things don't. Is in Bolivia, which elected the progressive candidate Louis Arc to be president, and this is actually an indication that the pandemic has not only sort of soured everyone, but actually can be harnessed in the force of something good and progressive. I hope that there's not a coup to take him off of office, but this is very good and interesting news. On the other hand, of course, there's a proliferation of fake news coming from all over, and most recently it was that the University of Florida reported that the students there were receiving threatening email with the subject line, "Vote for Trump or else." It's really nuts. And I'm sure that's so incredibly apparent as fake news, kind of prank or whatever, that it's really absurd. But after reading this, what came to mind was back in 2016 when I read about actually a workshop, we could say, or a cell in Macedonia, which was churning out fake news that on contract, that these people who were doing it, they had no idea about political things. They had no political agenda, I should say. You know, it's just kind of a job for that. And I think that's what we see more and more of. That's just sort of people making a little money by inserting bots and things in the internet. And they, I know, I keep going like that. Yes. I should wear my back support here. It's kind of cute, but I don't bother. Yeah, okay. Well, enough of all of this. I come to what I wanted to talk about, or what I want to talk about, I should say, mostly, after this. And I call it the Pernicious Lie of Originalism. And originalism is this trend, or this school, I should say, of interpreting the United States Constitution, interpreting law in general, in the United States, I would say. And I don't know anything about other countries, and systems of law are so different in different countries. I don't pretend to have any knowledge about that, but I do have a bit of knowledge about what's happening in the U.S. And because the situation now really puts the United States in the center of everything, it's worth talking about that. And it does have connections in many fields, not simply in law. Now, last week I did talk about original intent and originalism. Now, original intent was, I should say, the first school that was there. And what that was that when you're interpreting we talk about the Constitution itself right now. Oh, you know, I didn't bring my books. I'm going to have to go get them to show people, but that's okay. Okay, anyway, so original intent was the idea or the sense that we must look only to the intent of the people who wrote the document of the Constitution, let's say. We're talking about that. Now, the problem with that was, of course, the problem of intent, because you had judges, let's say, lawyers, who had particular points of view and were trying to, as I would see it, oh, great. Let's see. I don't need all these books, but just put them over there, and I will. Let me see if I have the best, most important book is not there. I'm sorry, so I still have to get it. Don't worry. I'll get it. I will go get it. Yeah, no. Yeah, I think it's in the. Yeah, okay, you got it. Okay. Yeah. This is impossible. I know. Just, I hope you get a good laugh out of all of this, what I'm trying to do here. Anyway, the problem of intent, of course, was that historians, scholars, started chiming in and saying, no, first of all, to understand intent, you need to understand the social circumstances, you'll need to understand the reasons against which certain things. Yes, that is the very, actually, quite important book, I would say, for something that was written in law, became law whatever, and also you need to understand the arguments of at the time among the different framers of the laws, for instance. And, of course, all of this can be subject to different interpretations and different, as I say in every of these live streams, misreadings. So, original intent then evolved, I should say, or became originalism. Now, the doctrine of originalism is, in a way, much more dangerous even than original intent. Because what that did was it said, well, originalism, we just look at the text itself, and we just look at the original meaning. And for the original meaning, we don't need to look up history. We don't need to we don't need to know the different contexts of the words. We just need to know the words themselves. Even though sometimes a word may mean have meant, I should say, something extremely different from what we think it means now. But this is all beside the point. And that turns the doctrine of original into a kind of justification for any kind, as I would say, of prejudice which of the person, let's say the legal person, the judge perhaps, should I say, this prejudice which this person wants to somehow support and or hide within the jargon of legalese, I would say. So what originalism has done is it's taken the doctrine of legal intent and taken history out of it. You see. So that's something very, very bizarre to me, that it's actually, that people can actually follow that. And it's has become, I should say, already an important school of thought in several schools of law, I should say, in the United States. I look at it here. I actually do I write? Yeah. I say that's rather kind of lazy person's way of justifying what they want to actually establish for other people. Yeah. Okay. So I talk a little more about the history of this, just a little bit. Now, Chief Justice John Marshall, one of the very first Supreme Court justices, actually had something to say about that already, even though he did not use, nor did he actually know the term originalism, I believe. But he was there when the Constitution, of course, of the United States was argued about and was written, was founded, etc., etc. And so he knew all of the background, and the various intrigues which were involved in the formulation of the document. And he wrote, "We must never forget that it is a constitution we are expounding, a constitution meant to be adapted and to endure for ages to come." Well, that's very interesting, and has very interestingly been forgotten by many people today. Okay, so what do I want to look at in terms of this? I want to take a brief look, and I'll come back to this. And for this, I need here. This is a very important book, I think, about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment has to do in the United States with the right to bear arms. In other words, to actually, okay, I go up, yeah. Am I up enough?
Show me the book.
Yeah, I will in a second. Okay. So, this amendment is a very short amendment, and it just says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's all that is. It's just one sentence. And this has, especially in the later, from the late 19th century through the present day, has created huge kind of protests and also huge problems. And there are two parts to this. There's the well-regulated militia and the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Now, in originalism, you can sort of separate these two, and don't worry about well-regulated militia, because we don't have a militia anymore, really, so that's okay. And to just say, well, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That means that everyone has the right to own a weapon, perhaps any kind of weapon that person can buy. Okay. Now, the question, though, of the Second Amendment is really, why is the beginning of that amendment a well-regulated militia? That could have been an afterthought, you see, but it's in the beginning. So in fact, that's the main part. And then what to bear arms comes after that and has to be connected to militia. Okay, now, this book we read this way. Of course, partisans of gun rights argue that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to keep and bear arms for self-defense, recreation, and if necessary, to take up arms against their government. Gun control advocates also claim to have history on their side and maintain with equal vigor that the Second Amendment simply protects the collective rights of states. Both sides have the history wrong, and that's really true. And actually, if you have any knowledge of history, that's obvious. The original understanding of the Second Amendment was neither an individual right of self-defense nor a collective right of the states, but rather a civic right and duty that guaranteed that citizens would be able to keep and bear those arms needed to meet their legal obligation to participate in a well-regulated militia. This is kind of like what we have now in Switzerland, I think, where in fact you have universal. If I hope that I'm right about this and not out of date completely. You have basically universal military service or military training, but what that does is it trains people to become militia members, let's say, in the event of some kind of attack against the country. You see, so what we had at the time this was written was a legal obligation of people to actually serve in what were these militias. There was no standing army, and the standing army was something that actually before the revolution, the standing army was something that the British, the United States was a British colony, was not United States at that time, it was just colonies. Standing army, so that the British imposed on the settlers, on, I should say, the citizens of the colonies, and in fact, I will talk about this a little bit better in a minute, a little more detail, I should say, in a minute. In fact, the British Crown at that time tried to disband and prohibit the local militias in the colonies, especially in the area of New England. Okay, now, what bearing arms for the militia meant at the time, and I will say here, a restoration of the original meaning of the Second Amendment would be a nightmare. It would certainly involve more intrusive gun regulation, not less. This is like Switzerland, or at least what I read about Switzerland at the time. Proponents of gun rights would not relish the idea of mandatory gun registration, nor would they be eager to welcome government officials into their homes. That's what was part of this, to inspect the weapons which they owned, as they did at the time of the colonies and the revolution. Gun control advocates, of course, might blanch at the notion that all Americans would be required to receive firearms training, and would certainly look askance, as they say here, at the idea of requiring all able-bodied citizens to purchase their own military-style weapons. And what's very interesting at the time, that the pilgrims who had come over earlier and were pacifists, they petitioned to be exempt from the duty of being in the militia and be exempt from the obligation to actually bear arms as part of the militia. That's part of this. Okay, I have a little bit more, and then he writes also, given the centrality of the militia to the everyday lives of the colonists, one can appreciate their horror when they discovered that the British intended not only to foist an oppressive standing army upon them, remember that's the standing, but also to disarm the colony's militia. And people, you may know about the Tea Party, etc., in Boston, that in fact this all came about from this cause, I would say. That's right. A writer for the Boston Gazette reported that the royal governor intended to punish Americans in a fashion more grievous to the people than anything hitherto made known. The governor's plan included three components. First, the inhabitants of this province are to be disarmed. The province is to be governed by martial law, and a number of the gentlemen who have exerted themselves in the cause of their country are to be seized and sent back to Great Britain. Okay, that's all that. It goes on and on and on. Now, this is most important, that at the time, the people who were protesting against the British were actually very interested and very concerned about history. And their leader was Samuel Adams. He was kind of a rabble-rouser, but also was very concerned about historical and I should say legal and also logical justification. And for that, he turned to the jurist, English jurist, who was probably the most famous at the time. His name was William Blackstone. And this is what he wrote about what Blackstone had said to him, let's say. Having arms for their defense, Blackstone tells us, is a public allowance under due restrictions of the natural right of resistance and self-preservation, when the sanctions of society and laws are found insufficient to restrain the violence of oppression. You see, what that meant is that, in fact, this was a societal issue, not an individual issue. So it had nothing to do with an individual having the right to own a gun and to shoot it and perhaps even to kill someone, but it was a societal right, and as he said, this ancient right was not exercised by individuals, but rather required that citizens act together in concert as part of a well-regulated by the government militia. Without legal authority, a group of armed citizens acting on their own was little more than a riotous mob. Okay, this is all very important, and I will explain more why it is. Now, I think that that's probably all I need right now. Yeah, one sentence. You see, and this is our author. Is Saul Cornell. Who's very good. Here, let me. Actually, I didn't really show the book, did I? So I should show it. It's very much a definitive study on the Second Amendment here. Okay, so you see that Adams and his contemporaries believed rights were inextricably bound up with legal obligations. This characteristic of 18th century rights was elaborated by Blackstone when he wrote that the rights of persons that are commanded to be observed by the municipal law are of two sorts. First, such as due from every citizen, which are called duties, civil duties, and secondly, such as belong to him, to the person himself, or nowadays to people themselves, we should say, which is the more popular acceptation, that's an old-fashioned word, of rights. So, in other words, there were rights and duties, civil duties involved, which in fact these rights actually entailed. Okay, I think this is enough of this. It's just, I just did this in rather detail, probably not enough detail, but enough to show that.
Thomas,
What happened?
the clarinet is broken.
Ooh, yes. Okay, that the issue of originalism, which simply takes the word itself and says, okay, this is what it is. And maybe, goes to an old dictionary or something and sort of, and also, I would say, parses things in ways that are, how should I say, that can actually give justification for one thing or another, is very dangerously absurd. Now, I just want to go to the field of music here, and to the concept of pitch that we have. It's funny to go from guns to pitch. But anyway, this has to do with the kind of historical performance movement, kind of somehow reconstructing or what was actually original in performance, etc. And I will be talking more about this, I think, in different aspects of this. But pitch is very interesting because what has been kind of codified now, well, we have modern pitch, let's say, which is 440. That was actually decided upon in 1939. That's and let me get this out because I have very interesting tables here. Yeah, here we go. 430, which is supposedly classical pitch. 415, which is Baroque pitch. And 392, these are all A's at cycles per second, or these are hertz, I guess, with what they are. That's which is 392 would be French Baroque pitch or French Baroque opera pitch, we could say. 392, yeah. Now, of course, you have from 440, 415 is about a half step flat. For 392 is a whole step flat. And I kind of like that because that means that the B-flat clarinet which we play is actually a C clarinet. If we adopt that pitch. Maybe we should. We should kind of have a movement to have, this is, we call it clarinet pitch, 392. And actually, there's what would be kind of intermediate pitch between the classical pitch and modern pitch of 435. And I mentioned that 435, especially because I was personally involved in a bit of an argument about that several years ago when I played a Schubert octet with a singer that will be unnamed and who's involved in period and whose husband also was very involved in the period instrument movement, who asked me, he said, this is Schubert, of course, so the pitch at Schubert has to be 435. And I said, first of all, well, I had already gotten this clarinet here, and this is a little bit later, by Piaget, and it's this is a wonderful 13-key instrument. This is from around 1830, let's say. That's 1830, just a few years after Schubert would have written this. And remember that the Paris pitch was generally considered to be lower, let's say. It's way over 440. The pitch of this clarinet, and it's cold right now. You'll warm it up, it goes even much higher than this. This is not a copy. This is not an approximation. This is the instrument, and unless the laws of physics have changed appreciably in the past couple hundred years, the bore and the length have determined the pitch of the instrument. And I'm sure that Piaget, who was a very respected maker, he was the favorite student, apprentice of the great French maker Simio. And as you can see, the instrument is actually so beautifully made. Yeah. And is very well in tune, I would say, except that it's very sharp. What's that?
I want to compare with piano intonation.
Oh, okay. How do I do? Yeah. Well, here's modern clarinet. See, right now it's just a tiny bit sharper than that. If you actually warm the instrument up, it goes up in pitch appreciably more than that, than this. So that's okay. But it's not 435 by any means. What are you asking?
Not that one.
Huh?
Not that one.
Which one?
Piaget.
Oh, okay. You see, it's coming even a little higher. Yeah. Okay. But I love this instrument. But in modern period instrument circles, I cannot play that instrument because it's way too sharp. Now the actual history of pitch is actually quite fascinating, and I just give you a little bit about this. You know, let me see. I want to make sure that I do not make a mistake in what I want to say, but where am I? Oh, I think that I didn't bring it, so I forgot his name. Oh, that's terrible. One second. It's just I don't find it here in my book. That we think of pitch as actually having standards, but of course, before a certain time, you really could not have any kind of standard. And the reason is that you didn't have that people didn't have a way of really doing that, particularly. Now the tuning fork was actually supposedly invented by a trumpet player. Yes, and I'm trying to find his name, who maybe it's up higher. Where did I do this? Put this. Well, in any case, it was a trumpet player who worked with. Why can't I find it? I apologize. Yeah, you know, that just goes to show I have to pay more attention now. Maybe I actually can find this here. Hold it. Yeah, I got it. Phew. 1711. Not far from the time that the clarinet supposedly was invented, in fact. And the name of the person was John Shore, who worked with Handel, actually. And he supposedly invented the tuning fork. It was those two metal bars, but which would vibrate with this. We know what a tuning fork is, and you could be quite precisely regulated by their density and length that way. And this was much more accurate. This is much more accurate than what was older, which were pitch pipes. And pitch pipes had always had a great variance of pitch themselves, depending on atmospheric conditions and actually the way they were played. So John Shore and the pitch of his tuning fork, one of which still exists apparently today, was a 423.5. Not 440, not 430, not 415, that time 1711, 423.5. You see, that's what we measure that by. Now, the science of measuring pitch is even later than that, and that began around 1834. In fact, using when the cycles per second, the measurement was actually codified using a mechanical device. It was kind of a stroboscopic device, and the pitch of it was able to actually show in cycles per second the pitch of the tuning fork, which people didn't know before that. They just knew a basic sound, you see. Okay, and what they tune their tuning fork that they used was actually an A440 at that time. Yeah, it's 1834. Now, back in the 15th century, this was a fellow by the name of Arnold Schlick. He was of Heidelberg. He wrote that the pitch of the time was A502. Now, this has nothing to do with hertz or cycles per second because they didn't know. That was just something that he actually mentioned, some of his own measurement of something or other. And there's an organ from 1351 which had a pitch of A505. And in the 17th century, then all these A's probably varied between hertz 373 and 402. Okay, this is now we have here dating from organs, and you can measure organ pipes, and that will give an approximate pitch of that. Although of course the actual pitch will depend very much on temperature and not so much on air pressure, but humidity as well, and the actual shape, or whether the pipe is out of shape a little bit, etc., etc. But here we have, and I have this very partial list of pitch throughout, and yeah, okay, and now 1640 there was a Viennese Franciscan organ at the pitch of 457.6. Okay, now John Shore's tuning fork, of course, at 423.5. Now the tuning fork, which was of a Mozart Stein's tuning fork, at least one of his tuning forks, was at an A421. And let me see. I'm just going to go throughout here. Let's say 1759 Cambridge organ was at A309. And here finally, 1772, the Silbermann, Gottfried Silbermann, in Dresden, built an organ which had a pitch of A415. So there, if we're in Dresden playing with that organ at 415, we'd be rather accurate. Okay. Going on, this is 1800. The Broadwood pianos. Broadwood was a very important piano maker at the time in 1800. And that had a C fork of, he had a C tuning fork of 505.7, which is about half a semitone or quarter tone lower than today, which is around 430. You see, so these different pitches have some kind of validity, partial validity, I should say. But then, of course, 1811, Paris Opera was at 427. Now, in Vienna, 1823, was at around 440. 428, Philharmonic Society was at 440 already. And Pleyel's piano in 1836 was at 446. Now pitch starts to get up way high. 1846, Philharmonic pitch was at A452.5. And then 1859, the French government set up a commission to study pitch and to standardize pitch at the time. And that was standardized at 435. Here we have our 435 at 15 degrees centigrade or Celsius. And the temperature is very important. And I think I mentioned this in one of my very first live streams when I was talking about the Ottensteiner clarinet and Brahms, which was tuned to 435 at 15 degrees centigrade, or Celsius, I should say, for everyone. And that, however, if we play at our comfortable temperature, I mean, I don't feel like playing at 15 degrees Celsius, I must say. And I don't think the clarinet would like it particularly. It will probably crack. But playing that at a comfortable temperature actually brings the pitch up to 440 at least. That's right. You see. So things are very complicated. Now, I would just mention also, this is in 1861, for instance, the Vienna Philharmonic, it's known for high pitch, but had established an A of 466. So we see that the actual historical situation is, and this is just a very small sample. You know, we can talk about Vivaldi, and who was also was played at a very high pitch at the time. But the actual historical situation is very complicated and very messy in a way. Now, that's not the only kind of mess. The other kind of mess is that places had two pitches generally, if they were standardized at all for the town they were in, and you'd have a central organ, for instance, and that would have its pitch that way. And then there would also be that we call the core tone. And then there was also comer tone, and I have to apologize because there's a wonderful book on the history of pitch, which I can't find at home right now. So maybe I'll find it in time for another one and sort of show it to all of you, because this is a very worthwhile book to read. Anyway, the comer tone was not necessarily the same pitch as the core tone, and could be as much as a half step or more different. You see. So that means that if you're playing in the church, you play in one pitch. You play in someplace else, you play at a totally different pitch. Now that is very interesting implications for the concept of perfect pitch, of course. And before it's 1839. There was no standard way to actually determine pitch. So pitch varied all over the place. But now we have codified that if we want to be authentic, we must play particular repertoire at 4:15 and another particular repertoire at 4:30, etc., etc., etc. And this is kind of original thinking, you see. Where you've sort of cherry-picked simply a particular pitch and you say, oh, okay, well, this was here in Dresden at this time, this 4:15. This is what our pitch is, and this is what it should be if we are going to be original. Right. Now, this originalism in music, and there are other aspects to the originalism, which has to do with even things like bow strokes, etc., ways of blowing, fingerings, things like that. And I don't think I will explain that now at all, but at some time I will talk about fingerings and historical fingerings and the problems that we have with that. But this kind of modern codification of techniques, of pitch, of ways of expression, etc., etc. Oh, shall I show this? Nice little later. Okay. They do not have the earth-shattering consequences that, for instance, United States constitutional law have, but they do evidence the very similar kind of disregard for, I should say, the not vagaries of history, but the complexity of history and the complexity of life. And this complexity is something that we should be very aware of, I think. Despite these tendencies, I should say, to set things in a particular way, very often for ulterior motives. Now, that's all I have to say about this.
No, the composer talking about pitch, like Mozart went to many places.
Yes, and he had to play in different pitches.
But he mentioning it in
a
letter or something?
I don't know anything about that, I must say. It may be, but I've read many Mozart letters, but I've never heard anything about pitch. And there, of course, was a famous problem of pitch with Mühlfeld. It's when he went to England with Joachim, and his clarinets, which were built for the lower pitch standard that Meiningen had adopted, of, again, 435 at 15 degrees Celsius, or let's say 440 at a comfortable temperature. When he went to England, he found that the pitch that the orchestra he was supposed to play the concertino with was way too high, was way over, it's sort of, we could say, old-fashioned pitch, way over 440. So he was not able to play with it. And so instead, he played with piano. They tuned the piano down to his pitch.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then he also played the Brahms Quintet with Joachim and Joachim's quartet that way, because they were able to accommodate his pitch. And of course, there's also the time when he first met Clara Schumann, who played them. They played the Fantasy-Stücke together. Before he came there, apparently he sent his tuning fork so that Clara's piano could be tuned to the right pitch. And her piano was probably tuned rather sharper. Then he was able to play with that. Of course, earlier, before this which was like 1874, I think, around then. I don't quite remember the exact date when I have it written down. It's always the problem of writing things down. Because you write down and then you feel, well, we don't have to remember them because it's already written down. That's like the famous statement of the conductor Hans Knappersbusch. It was when someone asked, why do you use the music when you are conducting and not by memory? He said, because I can read music. You see. So anyway, well, I can read also, so then I don't really remember certain things. But I believe it was around 1874 that the Meiningen Orchestra adopted the pitch from which the French had actually originally codified in 1859. So you can see a long time went by before orchestras were sort of coerced in a certain way to adopt this pitch. So what do I want to say? Before that time, he must have played instruments which had a much higher pitch, as much as 40, at least a half step higher. Hard for us in our standardized age to actually imagine. I mean, for me to imagine that is very, very difficult. But I think that our sense of pitch is very modern, in fact. So that is the case. Now, of course, also, itinerant musicians, wind players and brass players would travel with all sorts of different joints, just so they could piece together an instrument which was more or less the right pitch for whatever place they were playing at. And they would be considerably different, these joints, and also keyboards, of course, often could be moved by half steps, you see, so that you can kind of approximate someone's pitch who's coming, can't play with and that way. So there was a lot of transposition going on that way. So what time is it now exactly? Yeah. Okay. So I'm sorry I didn't play anything for you. I was thinking about doing that. Well, I played the instrument a tiny bit, but maybe this is enough for today. And for this wonderful Piaget instrument, we can just show you this wonderful little case here, which is in here. So compact and well designed.
Do you remember we bought that at the antique store?
Yes, in Paris, of course. Yeah. We saw instrument in the window, and the dealer who was there, the proprietor, we were talking about this instrument. He said, "Wait, I have something good for you." And he went into the back and came out with this instrument. Of course, we got it. It's unusual because it's in such good condition. Here, let's take this back here. But interestingly, when I visited several times Nicholas Shackleton, who had really the hugest collection of historical clarinets. They are now in Edinburgh. He tragically passed away much before he should have. But I played many of his instruments, and I borrowed some of them also. In fact, I even borrowed A clarinet from him, which was pitched so high that I could use it as a B-flat clarinet at 430. But virtually none of the instruments corresponded to any kind of our standardized historical pitch. And that was also true. This fellow in New Jersey who had a huge collection of instruments, Bill Maynard. His instruments also, which I tried, really almost never corresponded to what we now call historical pitch. His instruments are in the Shrine to Music in, is that South Dakota? I never remember exactly where it is. Anyway, okay, this has been very informal. I think that I will gather myself together more and more, but I didn't want to actually spend time today. Didn't feel it was somehow appropriate for me at the moment. Yes, yes, yes. Up, 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 up. Yeah, I think I should just have a brace just to go like this all the time. To actually talk about clarinet technique or something like that. But I will talk about that. And I mentioned in my little introduction that I've been rethinking what I think are probably some of my, I call them noble half-truths, that I've thought were actually probably true, but actually turn out to be half-true now. So I will leave you with that, and I promise that the next time we get together, I will start with these noble half-truths. Thank you. Be well, everyone. Take care.